Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast. I'm Marc Givler, joined by Kevin Noon today. We have a lot of things we'd like to hit on. It's been an interesting month in Ohio State recruiting. We've talked about some of those things over the last few weeks, but still some stuff to go over. A big recruiting weekend last weekend, a big decision coming up on the recruiting front this weekend. And before we get into all that, I think we need to address the kind of the elephant in the recruiting room right now. And that is the lack of a head coach, at least for now, as the time of recording this. I'm sure that will be fixed in pretty short order. But, Michigan does not have a head coach right now. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh leaving for the LA Chargers, opening up that position. I think everyone assumes Sherrone Moore is going to be named Michigan's head coach at some point. But in the meantime, there's a lot to unpack here in terms of the loss of Harbaugh, what assistants he may take with him, and how that could impact any Ohio State and Michigan recruiting overlap. So first, Kevin, I think we all expected Harbaugh to jump to the NFL after this year. I don't think that was a big surprise, but, this does sort of open up a window of uncertainty around Michigan that maybe Ohio State can take advantage of.
Yeah, and I think the first place that people go to is the portal and what can they get off of the team. But I'm looking more at it from a recruiting side. Sure, the names of like the defensive tackles and Colston Loveland and Will Johnson are all names that Ohio State fans can sit there and fancy about. But those are guys that have played within the program for a year, 2 years, 3 years, what have you, and are probably a little further dyed in the wool blue than others. But you look at Ohio State and Michigan recruiting against each other, and under Jim Harbaugh, it never really was a case of them going strictly after the same kids. I think that Ohio State and Michigan under Lloyd Carr and some others did go head to head a lot more than what we've seen there. I went and I looked at Michigan's recruiting class for 25, and it's 3 players, and one of them was was born to be a Wolverine, and Bobby Kenka, who's out of Howell. Michigan, they got a quarterback out of Florida and a tight end out of state of Tennessee. But what does this mean for recruiting in general? And I guess the question is going to be moving forward, if you're Sherrone Moore and you're named Michigan's head coach, what is it that you're recruiting on at this point? Are you recruiting on Jim Harbaugh's accomplishments? Or, are you having to recruit against rumored out, punishments that could be coming when an NOA is served probably in the spring? It's going to be interesting to see where this intersection of these things go, because Michigan is not going to see, especially if they make the hire within, they're not going to see the great departure from a different head coach that Alabama did. Michigan's already gone through its great departure, and that was because of the glut of 4th and 5th and 6th year guys that were on that roster. So it's not going to be a case of a mass exodus there, but it'll be interesting to see how Michigan is going to try and get any wind back in its sails with this change, because I don't care how obvious it was to everybody that Jim Harbaugh was going to have take every chance he had to leave to go to the NFL this year. But okay, well, now we're to that point. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I kind of dismiss the portal stuff because maybe in a different universe where Ohio State was still dominating the rivalry and Michigan was firing a coach for going 5-7 or 6-6, I could maybe see something like that. But the Will Johnsons of the world, especially, he's a legacy. Even like a Colston Loveland. You've beat Ohio State 3 times in a row. I can't put myself in that position and think, yeah, the logical move if I wanted to leave Michigan would be to go to Ohio State after the last few years. I think if they would lose anybody, let's say if sanctions came in and some players are like, well, whatever those sanctions might be, it would maybe impact the players a little bit, and those players would be like, well, I don't want to be around for this, then maybe, you start looking at a Georgia or an Alabama or a USC or something like that. But I can't see Ohio State being a factor in any transfer decisions here. I really would be surprised. But the recruiting thing's interesting. They have not overlapped in recruiting as much as they did under Lloyd Carr, as much as they did under Brady Hoke, certainly. That hasn't changed too much in 25, but there are some interesting recruiting situations, especially along the offensive line. So, Ohio State's probably like 2 top offensive line targets right now in terms of guys who are realistic. I'm not talking about like David Sanders or someone like that who's just like a total long shot, but like realistic players that Ohio State thinks they got a shot to land. You're looking at Carter Lowe, who decides tomorrow, and you're looking at Avery Gatch from Michigan, who's primarily, despite his national offer list, primarily seems to be a Midwest kind of Ohio State, Michigan State battle. Well, Michigan State's got a new coach, which is a splash hire, in my opinion. I thought they did a great job with their thing. So you're working against that a little bit. But it felt like Michigan was kind of the school that you really had to worry about. And so now they're going through a transition. And it's not just who are they going to hire. It's, as head coach, it's who is Jim Harbaugh going to take with him to the Chargers? Like, is he going to take 3 assistants? Because if that happens, you're starting all over on a lot of relationship fronts. And the worst thing I think for Michigan is going to be the looming specter of what is the NCAA going to do? Do I want to commit to a place in April where I don't know if something could change from the NCAA in July, and then, okay, I'll just reassess at that point and decommit? Or do I just not want to worry about that? Do I want to maybe point my attention somewhere else? And if they get cleared by the NCAA, or they feel like the punishment's not too severe, then maybe I double back. I mean, that's going to be an interesting mindset recruits have to have. But I think it opens up this next 6 months as a good opportunity. If you're recruiting against Michigan for players, I think it opens up a great opportunity here these next 6 months.
Has anybody had any less bounce as a national champion than Michigan has had? Michigan fell out of the headlines 48 hours after winning the title. I don't remember exactly which day Nick Saban shocked the world with his sudden resignation, but you already had, going into everything, all of the allegations being out there, whether or not it's going to be a temporary championship, yada, yada, yada. And then Michigan goes and wins the game. And then within 48, 72 hours, nobody's talking about them. The speculation of Jim Harbaugh leaving, which was just speculation at that point, ended up proving to be true. We knew that they were going to lose a lot. There's no recruiting bump for Michigan. And we've talked about, Marc and I have worked together for years and years and years and years. And we've talked about whether or not you get that recruiting bump in the next class, or if it's the class after that. And oftentimes it's the class after that, just because of how relationships are built and everything else. But Michigan certainly, I mean, not only isn't getting a recruiting bump, it's going to have to retrace steps that it's already gone through, just because of self-inflicted and non-self-inflicted wounds altogether.
You started off by saying, when's the last time a national champion has got such a little recruiting bump? The first thought that went through my head was Ohio State in 2002, because the next several months were a circus. You had the Maurice Clarett saga with the NCAA in town looking into all that stuff. And Ohio State, that next recruiting class Ohio State signed, I believe, was Jim Tressel's worst. So ironically, it feels a little bit like that, where Ohio State should have had this massive, they just signed one of the best classes in school history, that as those guys as freshmen won a national title, and it just didn't feel like they were able to capitalize on that in the immediacy of the title. So I think Michigan's probably in a worse spot now that Ohio State's thing was kind of one player. It was like a Maurice Claret type of thing. It wasn't so much an entire program, but there was a lot of stuff there too with Ohio State, a lot of drama Ohio State was dealing with coming out of their national championship. So that's kind of the last one I think of that comes to my mind. But yeah, it's interesting that they're probably not going to be able to take this momentum and run with it the way most schools would be able to. So that'll be interesting. This will be a good segue. So one guy who has been a very much Ohio State-Michigan battle pretty much throughout is Carter Lowe, top 100 offensive tackle out of Toledo Whitmer. He announces tomorrow, which is Saturday, at 3 p.m. Eastern. We will be there and have live coverage of it. Yes, Carter eventually got out to SEC schools, looked at Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia. Like he's done his like national research, but this kind of started Ohio State versus Michigan, and it sort of never got off of that path, in my opinion. And so now he's announcing, and Michigan, Harbaugh's gone. So I think that kind of the fact that this announcement's still going, I think kind of tells you where this is going. I would be very surprised if Ohio State's not going to win this on Saturday. But these are the types of things that can happen where, I think Ohio State on its own was pulling away the last few months, but it sort of makes a lock is kind of, I think, what's been happening here over the last month or so. So, I mentioned Avery Gatch from Michigan. That's another offensive lineman that, who knows? Let's see what happens there. So I think there are some guys here that Ohio State can take advantage of. But Kevin, first, let's get your thoughts on Carter Lowe here. Any concerns as we're here about 24 hours away from his decision?
No, not really. And as we were kind of talking before we hit record on the show, it certainly does not hurt Ohio State's chances that the presumed number 2 is kind of drawing dead at this point. And, there are going to be other hats on the table. Generally don't do a lot of these types of things with just 2 hats. It's just kind of how it works. But as you said, it's been an Ohio State-Michigan battle, and Ohio State had been separating itself from the pack. But when you see this continue, we're not going to change dates. We're not going to do any of that. It doesn't take an expert tea leaf reader to figure that one out. Now, we always want the kid to have his moment. I wouldn't be going out and throwing a crystal ball out or anything like that. I want the kid to have his moment, but I also am not going to be driving up to Toledo on a Saturday just for the hell of it either. So read into that how you will.
So that would be obviously some huge news for Ohio State. He's been their top offensive line target in that class for more than a year now. They've put a ton of effort into that one. This was one of those guys that, again, there's not a lot of must-gets in recruiting. I feel like Justin Fry feels this is a must-get. I feel like maybe the people signing Justin Fry's checks feel like this is a must-get for him. So we'll find out again at 3 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. So stay tuned for that on BuckeyeHuddle.com and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. We will have coverage of all of that, reaction and everything else. So there's that. Ohio State is coming off, and they didn't do a lot of these the last couple of years. I don't know if that was a philosophical change. That may be something to ask Ryan Day at his next media availability, but they had a really big junior day this past Saturday, and boy, was it an impressive list. You had a ton of top 2025 guys there, especially, and this was mostly Midwest centric. They had a few out-of-state guys come in, a few out-of-region guys come in. Nate Roberts from Oklahoma, the 4-star tight end came up, but a lot of Ohio guys, a lot of Indiana guys, Midwest guys, 25 and 26, a lot of priority guys in 26. When you look at something like this, it's a big event. Is this something they should do more of, or do you kind of understand how they, I really think they like to wait until spring ball because you get to look at how the operation is truly run. The weather's nicer. You're not going to have a blizzard, hopefully in March. I mean, weird things have happened, but you're generally safe on the weather. A bad weather day might be 45, 50. It's not going to be 5. So kind of, I guess your philosophy on this, I kind of like what they did, kind of making it Midwest centric. And I think maybe one or two of these a winter would be helpful, but I kind of also do see the side of like, look, let's wait until March.
Well, I think with the accelerated recruiting calendar, and we've had early signing period for several years, so that's not necessarily new. But where the official visits can start and things of that nature, I think that that's why you see them going back to doing this type of junior day. Now, it certainly would help if Ohio State basketball, which always seems to be a backdrop for this, it seems to be around a game to where they can bring them in there for a half, would play better in January. Now, Ohio State did win its game against Penn State, was up like 17-0 in the game, really never was pressured in the game. But I think I like them doing the junior days because it gives you another visit prior to the officials. You're not spending the officials saying, this is our football stadium, this is our weight room, this is our nutritionist. I mean, all of that is done. And then you can get down to more important business, if you will, on those visits. Now, you hit the point, though, too. I think it's important that you're doing it with people who are used to the weather largely, or used to similar type of weather. I don't know if I'm going to be bringing in guys out of Chamadon, Madonna, or St. Thomas Aquinas, or Mater Dei in 5-degree weather. Probably not. I mean, you can't hide it. It's not like, oh, it doesn't exist. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. But let's not bring it to the forefront either. So I think it needs to be targeted the way it has been.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity for them. Like, I've talked to a lot of the kids a lot of the Ohio kids who are on campus, and they're all telling me like, yeah, I'll be back in a month and a half for spring practice. I might be coming to the spring game too. So it's a good opportunity to take as many shots as you can on building relationships. You get a limited amount of time with these guys. I mean, yes, you can call them, they can call you, but the reality is for most kids, you're going to get somewhere between 3 to 5 opportunities to be face-to-face with them before they sign. I mean, this is not a thing where you're going to spend 40 opportunities in front of these kids. So I think having a couple of these is helpful, and I like how they targeted it this time. It was very Ohio Midwest centric. They had their 3 offensive linemen from Ohio and 26 that they've offered. Another guy I want to talk about here for a minute, Deron Parks out of Hurricane, West Virginia, which I looked is like halfway between Huntington and Charleston. So that we're talking a 3-hour drive. I mean, that's essentially an in-state kid. Obviously, West Virginia is going to be, scoff at that, but it's in that hour. It's in that 3-hour box they draw that includes like Indianapolis and everything else. So, that was a big visit for them to get this early. He told me the visit was amazing. He had a great time. He's connected with the coaches. He's, so that is as we start to put together this 2026 O-line class. And, I've talked about before these 3 Ohio guys and maybe a couple more Ohio guys they may look at, to have 3 guys from Ohio you've offered already, a kid from West Virginia, it's 3 hours away you've offered already. This just looks like this is setting up. And you want to be careful because we've had some high hopes of big O-line classes early in the process before. It feels more real than ever this time. It really does.
You're not having to rely upon a kid out of Miami or Washington, D.C. or Houston to make or break your offensive line class. If you can shore it up with in-state and in-region guys, you talked about the 3-hour radius. I think if you can shore it up there and then maybe go big game hunting for one more, I mean, it's even better if you don't. If you can fill all your needs and you're happy and you're like, we've got everything we need here, then there's really no chance of disappointment unless somebody out recruits you and somebody who theoretically on your back porch and that you shouldn't reasonably see get recruited away from you. But I think it's important. I think we saw some of that last year with getting Ian Moore and the Armstrong twins, and then they had Marc Nave, and then everybody went their separate ways, and they went a little further north to go get Gabe Van Sickle. But it's shaping up to be solid. Now, of course, the problem is in terms of recruitniks. Don't tell me about the kids we get in April and May and June. They're, we want who are we landing in November and December? And if you have your line class locked up by that point, there's still going to be some FOMO going on. But I think that Justin Fry and the people that employ Justin Fry would be really happy to see this class come together with many of these targets that were on campus last week.
And these are big name guys. Like, these are all like top 100 national caliber players. These are not just like, oh, these are the best couple guys in Ohio, so we're going to offer them. Like, some people think Max Riley's a 5-star. So, Sam Greer is a top 50 player. When people actually wake up on Will Conroy, I think he's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 centers in the country. And then Parks is an early top 100 guy, top 50 guy, I think. I think Rivals has him in the top 50. So these are big, big names. Like, this is not the class a few years ago where it was like, yeah, it was Ohio heavy, but it was like a lot of 3-star guys, a lot of guys who they weren't beating Alabama for, they weren't, didn't have Michigan offers, didn't have Notre Dame. Like, this is going to be a little bit different if this plays out the way I think it is. So I think it looks really strong. Again, you could have 4 guys, if you get 4 they've offered, be incredible. Be an incredible O-line class, and you still got 1 or 2 more spots, which may come from Ohio, it may come from elsewhere. But like, that's the other thing. Like, they even have, like, they're in on Micah Smith from Florida, he's down there at Vero Beach. He's a 26 kid. He's camped. He's visited for a game. He's essentially told me Ohio State's right there at the top for him. And every conversation I've had with him. So you have this regional thing going on, but then you do have 1 or 2 national guys where it's like, okay, let's go fight for those guys. So I've always been cautious in getting too optimistic about offensive line recruiting over the years, because we've seen it kind of fizzle out several times after what looked like it would be a really fast, hot start. I don't think that's going to be the case in 26. I think they're going to sign a monster offensive line class. I really do. I will put myself out there on that. I will risk the freezing cold takes of this conversation to say that I think 2026 is a monster offensive line class. The other thing that we can get into, the other area of concern among the Ohio State fans, defensive line. Kevin, great regional setup this year for 25. They've gotten into it. And I'm not saying Larry Johnson should stop recruiting Florida or Texas or Maryland. I'm not saying that. But I think they've kind of had a lot of their eggs in those baskets the last few years. And there hasn't been a wide enough net to, if they miss on Dylan Stewart, to go get whoever. And part of that has been, admittedly, the Midwest has to do its part. It has, yes, they didn't get Lightfoot last year, but there's not been an abundance of defensive linemen in the Midwest the last few cycles. So in some ways, they've been a little bit forced to play the out-of-state game. That is not the case in 25. Justin Hill on campus again from Winton Woods, big-time edge prospect. He was there Saturday. Buckeyes lead for him. You've got Brandon Caesar up at Cleveland Heights, who's maybe a flex guy. Could be a strong side end, could be a 3-tech. But you've also got better than normal defensive line classes. And I wouldn't even say better than normal. I would say great defensive line classes in Illinois and in Indiana. So you have opportunities in 3 different states that are having better than normal years. Because I would say Ohio's having a strong year. I wouldn't say it's like a generational year, but Ohio's got a strong year. And then I think Indiana and Illinois, I look at Indiana and Illinois with like 4 4-stars in both states along the defensive line. That's almost unheard of. I mean, that's really, it feels generational for those 2 states.
I just hope some of these guys go to Best of Midwest here in mid-February so we can see some of these guys, get to talk to them. Really signifies the beginning of the camp season for us when we go out to Indianapolis. And 85% of the time, it's in an ice storm. because Midwest in February, it is the best. But yeah, I think that it is up to the state and up to the region to provide. We can go back to the Jim Tressel era, and these classes are 75-80% Ohio, because Ohio was presenting these types of players. And yes, there were times that Ohio State might go after the in-state guy versus the out-of-state guy because, well, there's the familiarity and just, keeping the guy home and everything else. And then there were some lean years, whether it's the population shifts, the growth in areas like Charlotte and Texas and everywhere else, to where people are leaving the Rust Belt and going and following the work. And we're seeing a bit of a chasm in terms of Ohio talent. Well, for defensive line, it's kind of rectifying itself a little bit. No, it's not back to the point of where you can just self-sustain yourself only recruiting the state of Ohio, but I really like Justin Hill. I really like Brandon Caesar. I think that this state, you're going to see maybe a little bit more put on in-state recruiting, and it's not a result per se of losing out on your Marquise Lightfoot or Dylan Stewart or Justin Scott or whoever. It's not a case of Miami coming in and recruiting away a second straight running back out of South Florida. I just think you have a grade. It's like kids that we have to offer, regardless of where they're from, have to kind of be at this grade. And I think Ohio just having more kids above the line right now, and that just helps. Because look at Nebraska to a certain extent. Nebraska's never had a recruiting territory of its own. And when it was in the Big 12, it was able to recruit Texas and Oklahoma. And since coming to the Big 10, not so much. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. So it's for the best that Ohio starts to carry its weight in terms of its high school talent, and that Ohio State's able to make those decisions and stay in state. And I think it's important to keep those relationships going. As we know, UC now being a Power 4 team is going to recruit heavily. Kentucky, always with Vince Marrow, has tried to get in and get kids before Ohio State can. And even if it does get a kid before Ohio State generally can come in and get them. All of that will come into play.
Yeah, and I'm looking here. Three of the top six prospects in Indiana are defensive ends, and they offered Marion Dye on Saturday. He visited, so that's one of the guys they've picked from the Midwest, who's just outside of Ohio. He's up in Elkhart, which is close to South Bend.
That's where we stayed for Notre Dame. We stayed in Elkhart.
Yes. So Damian Shanklin out of Warren Central in Indianapolis is a 4-star top 200 player. You've got Tyrone Burris Jr. out of Warren Central Indianapolis, who's kind of more of a lighter player. He's like 215, 220 right now, but he's kind of a jumbo athlete, but he's considered probably an edge. He's also out of Warren Central. You've got all these guys that you're looking at right now from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and it's going to make life so much easier. They're going to be able to take 3 or 4 guys from the Midwest in 25, and then they can do their star chase. You can go to Georgia and chase whoever. You can go to Florida, Maryland. There are guys Larry Johnson's going to want to go after, and he can do that without worrying about, if I strike out here, we're going to be sitting here with 2 defensive linemen on signing day. So this is just a much better setup this year in 25. So 25 D-line, 26 O-line, the Midwest is going to be critical. Last thing here, I think probably before we head out, is tight end recruiting in 25 has gotten a little bit interesting. Amari Winston was an early target. Was Ohio State versus Texas. Texas wins that one. Nate Roberts from Oklahoma has been Keenan Bailey's number 1 target at tight end. That's been a relentless pursuit. Oklahoma gets his brother in the transfer portal, but Nate was up here on Saturday. Everything's going very well there. I don't think that's going to be a huge thing. It's something to pay attention to, but I don't think it's a thing where it automatically this is going to go pull a 180 on Ohio State now that they've taken his brother out of the portal. So I think that one's going very well for Ohio State. But they've got an interesting situation because this is very likely going to be a 2 tight end class. And they offered Brock Schott. I'm thinking Tommy Shutt. They offered Brock Schott out of Indiana. Here we go again. Another player out of Indiana, number 2 player in Indiana, on his weekend visit this past weekend. So they had Schott and Roberts on campus. And now they've emerged there as maybe the team to beat. And you've also got Luka Gilbert in state. Something's going to have to give there. If they can get, if 2 commit before the other one's ready, someone's going to get left out there. And I used to, 6 months ago, I would have told you, Luka Gilbert's definitely in this class. I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah, if you would have talked to me 6 months ago, I would say this class was going to be Gilbert and Winston. We talked to Winston on Southern Swing. It just seemed like everything was trending that way. Roberts becomes available. It seems that kind of threw everything kind of in limbo at this point. And yeah, I've always had felt that Luka Gilbert was going to end up in this class. But with that being said as well, Ohio State's not going to sit around and wait. And obviously it feels that by offering Schott at this point, this was not a placeholder, see you in camp type of offer or anything else. This was an offer with a capital O. It does create some issues. I think that it is going to be a case of who tries to get in first. And I'm not necessarily privy to the pecking order between Schott and Gilbert of how they view each of them, but it is going to be a 2 tight end class because you look at where Ohio State is in terms of its numbers, and we know we're at the end of the line with G. Scott Jr. and Bennett Christian, who hasn't really had a chance to break through. I mean, he's a couple years in the program. Where are things going to sit there? They go to OU, Ohio University, not Oklahoma, since we kind of talked both. So let me clarify there. Get a tight end from there as well, more of a blocking tight end. It'll be interesting to see how that shapes up for Keenan Bailey, who for so many years working with Brian Hartline on the wide receiver product, and it was selecting more than recruiting. And is tight end going to kind of get to this point or not? I mean, it helps with having a couple of these guys within a tank of gas of Columbus. I don't have a crystal ball to say how I think this one ends up per se, but I do agree that it's not as much of a lead pipe cinch that we see Luka Gilbert in, especially if he takes time. I believe he was visiting Penn State the weekend that Ohio State had all of its recruits in.
I think it's really interesting if Schott is the first one, because at that point, I fully believe they would say the second spot is for Roberts until Roberts tells us no. That's been their once it became clear that Roberts wasn't a lock to go to Oklahoma, it was like sharks smelling blood in the water with them. They have been all over him. They've been all over Nate Roberts the last several months, and they've got him on campus twice, and Washington, Oklahoma is not right around the corner. So they've got him on campus a couple times already. This just feels like you don't even have to hear from them kind of. Yes, we have our sources we talk to, and they give us some really good information on the boards and things like that, but you wouldn't even have to know any of that. If you just kind of watch how they've approached Nate Roberts' recruitment, you would just kind of know, like, that's their guy. So this could get interesting, but I like where they're at with Schott coming out of the visit. I like where they're at with Roberts very much. And, so tight end recruiting could be fun. Keenan Bailey's been a great recruiter even before he was a full-time coach. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm kind of fascinated to see, like, does he blossom into this, like, tight end recruiting monster that just goes and grabs, 2 of the top 6 or 7 tight ends in the country every year. And Ohio always is usually good for one good tight end as well. So he may be in a really unique situation of these 2 tight end classes where it's like, okay, let's take Damarian Witten, for example. Let's take the Ohio kid, and then let's go find our favorite out-of-state guy. And so I like what I've seen out of Bailey so far, and I think they're giving him, and they, I mean, like Ryan Day and the higher ups are giving him the freedom to like pick his guys now. I think maybe at the beginning it's like, okay, well, like these are the guys we were recruiting, and like, I don't know, like you haven't been on the job that long, but this is like a cycle where it's like, okay, Keenan, this is your class, man. So like go find who you like and go get them. And so this is like a great trial, not a trial run, but like a great look inward, I guess, at his recruiting philosophy and his recruiting chops.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly works out that you have two guys within the region or whatever. And while you can't necessarily, while there's absolutely a path of where it gets screwed up, at least you have some geography on your side. And I think that if you find you're getting too far over your own skis, that you can rectify rather than falling off the mountain. But I'm going to generally bet on Keenan Bailey when it comes to recruiting. He has proven to be very adept at it. And, I don't think that Ohio State fans should really have any concerns that this is something that's going to get botched.
So a lot to still watch for here. Again, Carter Lowe decides Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern, BuckeyeHuddle.com, YouTube.com/Buckeye Huddle for live coverage of that. Great time to get on the message board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We're talking transfer portals, upcoming spring ball depth charts, breaking down newcomers like Caleb Downs. A lot of stuff to discuss on the board. Despite some of the craziness that happened there in November and December, I would say the mood of the board, the mood of the fan base is at like almost an all-time high. I mean, the optimism is through the roof. It's been a really positive environment, a really fun environment to go to work every day and go on the board, and everyone's kind of talking in a optimistic way and just kind of looking forward to the season. So great time to join if you're not already. And again, if you watch us on here on YouTube, we appreciate that, and we hope you subscribe to the channel. It just helps other Ohio State fans find us. And if you're more of a listener on Apple or Spotify or whatever, just give us a subscribe on there too, because that'll also help more Ohio State fans find us when they search for podcasts. So appreciate everyone watching and appreciate everyone listening, and we'll talk to you again here soon.